10 o'clock. Yeah, let's give it up for them, yes. Baptism weekend's my favorite. I was so glad as well that it was Pastor Ken baptizing people and not me, man. Those were like some real men there, Nate. Did you notice that we're getting baptized today? If that was like Nate and I, some people's forearms were not making it into heaven today. That was awesome. Ken, congratulations. We will pay for your trip to the chiropractor based on that. It was awesome. I just love baptism weekend. There's something so powerful about that. We have about 11 people getting baptized across our services this weekend, and it's just a beautiful thing to see people. It's not the act of getting baptized that saves you. It's just this visible expression of something that's happened in your life, and we just get an opportunity to celebrate that together as a church. We're going to continue our series together today, The Art of Living. This series for us has been this deep dive into the book of Proverbs, the wisdom book, and really just looking week in and week out at what wise people do. This guy named Solomon has put some thoughts down 2,700 years ago, and we started this thing off with this word hokmah, which just means wisdom. But this word hokmah just means skill in the art of living, that we can increase in the skill of the art of living. And what I want to talk about today is really a question. It's the most important question that really ultimately decides which path you take, which path I take in life, the path of the wise or the path of the fool. Several years ago when I was a college student, somebody gave me a book by this guy named A.W. Tozer. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of A.W. Tozer, but A.W. Tozer wrote a book called The Knowledge of the Holy. And even if you're not a church person or the name of that book is intimidating as it was when somebody gave it to me, there's a question that starts off the book that is a really, really important question, really changed my life, and it's this, or it's a statement: the most important thing about a person is what you think about when you think about God. And that's true for you today. It's true for me. It's true for all 7 billion people on the planet today. The most important thing about you is what you think about when you think about God. Think about it. It's the most important thing about your life, that essentially we all have a picture. We all have some kind of construct today of who God is, of what God is like. And even if you're here and you say, well, I'm not a Christian, I don't believe in God, well, that's your construct. That's your picture. It's empty, but that picture ends up determining the choices you make, the people you date, the music you listen to, how you spend money, maybe the job that you've chosen. All of life is essentially an overflow of what we believe about God. And so Tozer's point is essentially this, that the most important thing about your life is what you think about when you think about God. And oftentimes, if you're anything like me, we come to church and we start trying to change our behavior. We need to fix some things. I need a little more Jesus in my life, a little less Game of Thrones, whatever. We're trying to, make some modifications. We're trying to change some things. And at the end of the day, oftentimes what we discover is it's not a behavior problem, it's a picture problem. That we have a busted, repressive, outdated, out of focus view of who God is. And when we start to see God as he actually is, everything starts to fall into place. When we start to know God as he actually is, as the scriptures define God, we start to live a life that honors and trusts him. And at the core of what we're going to talk about today, if God for you, if God for me, if our picture of God is busted, if you have a God today who's repressive, who doesn't want something for you, he just wants something from you, then we end up going through life and we never trust him. We never want to give him our life. It becomes impossible. We might, go to church and do some behavior modification, but it becomes impossible to really want to follow God. I know for a lot of us in this room, myself included, maybe you grew up in church, and for me, I feel like in a lot of ways I'm recovering from the God of my childhood. Where I grew up in a church and it wasn't taught, but it was sort of caught somewhere along the way. If you were to ask me as a kid what my view of God was, I would have said God was just this old guy in heaven with a long white beard, sort of a ZZ Top kind of a God, who often, just held up a sign that said no. That was kind of my view of God. Because any question I ever asked a Christian or any question I ever asked any spiritual authority, that was always the answer, was no. So I just thought that kind of came from God. That was who God was. If I said, can I watch PG-13 movies? No. Why? Because we're Christians. We don't do that. Can I listen to the music all my friends are listening to? No. Why? Because we're Christians. Can I have any fun ever? No, we're Christian. Can I run beside the pool with scissors? No, we're Christian. That was sort of my view of God. I just thought he just wanted to tell me no. Anything that was fun, he was trying to just kind of take it away. And around, fourth grade, somewhere around there, I started to read the Bible, and I started reading the book of Matthew. And I remember as a kid reading that verse right before I went to sleep one night, where it said, "If your right eye ever causes you to sin, pluck it out." It's like, man, I'm just not that committed. I'm so sorry, God. Like, I'm going to take my chances with another faith. I don't know, man. I'm not that into this. And that was my God. He just wanted to, that was my view. He just wanted to take something from you. He wanted to take your fun. He wanted to take your Nintendo. He wanted to take your eye, for crying out loud. And if you have that kind of view of God, he's repressive, he's restrictive in nature, you just never end up wanting to follow him. Or as Solomon would say, by default, you just end up taking the path of the fool. And what we're going to discover today is that Solomon says there's something really, really central. In fact, he says above all else, there is something that is really, really important for us in life if we're ever going to choose the path of the wise, if we're ever going to increase in the skill of the art of living. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Proverbs chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screen. That's a great place to follow along. You can download the CRB app. That's another great place to follow along as well. And he's going to land on this question. He's going to talk about this path. There's the path of the wise, there's the path of the fool. But he's going to land on this question. And it's essentially about what do you find the most beautiful? What is your heart merged with? What have you fallen in love with in life? Is it God or is it something else? It ultimately becomes something. And his question at the end is, what is it for you? What is it for me? Because that determines, above all else, the path that we take. This is Solomon, verse 11, Proverbs chapter 4. I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. And so 70 times we see this in the book of Proverbs. There's the way of the wise, there's the way of the fool. Two roads diverged in the yellow woods. Which one are you going to take? Financially, vocationally, relationally, we get an option. The way of the wise or the way of the fool. And if you don't choose the way of the wise, that doesn't just place you on neutral territory. That by default places you on what Solomon says is the path of the fool. We've been discussing this the last few weeks. When you walk, I love this. He says, when you walk, your steps, if you are on the path of the wise, they will not be hampered. You will run. So you get sort of a Forrest Gump image here. You will run. You will not stumble. So there's a freedom that he's describing on the path of the wise. By having the rules and the authority of God in our life, by being underneath the authority of God, there's an incredible freedom that comes. You will run and you will not stumble. Solomon's dad, David, in Psalm 119, verse 32, he says it this way. He says, I will run. He's talking about God. He says, I will run in the path of your commands, for you have set my heart free. I love that verse. I will run in the path of your commands. This idea of Solomon, David, they view the commands of God as something that's so freeing and liberating. They run when they experience them. I run in the path of your commands, for you have set my heart free. It's an odd verse. We don't generally think of the word command and the word free in the same sentence, do we? If I were to ask you to describe someone who's free, you would say someone who has no rules, someone who's uninhibited. They don't seem to think of any constrictions, rule. But David seems to suggest, Solomon suggests in Proverbs the opposite, that there is an incredible freedom that comes within the rules of God. That as free as you will ever be, many of us in this room, you can stand up and tell the story, as free as you will ever be in this life, as much joy as you can ever possibly experience in this life, it's not found away from God, it's found with God. It's found under the canopy of God's authority and God's rules. And when we start turning from that, when we start walking away from that, we become hampered. We start stumbling. But freedom's found. This is Solomon's point, with God. And he's trying to help us understand that no decisions, no choices in life are made in isolation. Every choice that we make, we're on a path. It's all connected. That this choice is connected to that. We reap what we sow. That for better or for worse. So that oftentimes have you ever made a decision and in the moment you're sort of like, all I'm doing right now is gift wrapping a disaster to hand to my future self. This is sort of what's going on. Solomon's like, exactly, for better or worse. If you start making wise choices now, you're giving a gift to your future self, but you're on a path, and I want you to be free on this path. And it's found with God, not away from him. He's not come to bind you up in rules. He's come to give you rules to set you free. And Solomon sees God as the most beautiful option, the source of life, a source of joy. In his view of God, that's who God is. He keeps going. Hold on to instruction, which is an odd. All this is counterintuitive. You don't think, oh man, I want more rules. Hold on to instruction. We never do that. Nobody gets the owner's manual out of the glove box of the car and just clutches it. Yes, I love instruction. Hold on to instruction. He says, do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. The words of God in the Psalms and Proverbs, they would talk about the words of God as honey on the tongue. It's so sweet. Do not set foot on the path of the wicked or walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn from it. Go on your way, for they cannot rest. He's talking about the path of the fool. When you're on the path of the fool, you can't rest until you do evil. We don't think of it as evil in that moment. It's just doing what you want to do. They're robbed of sleep when you're on the path of the fool until they make someone else stumble. It says you get robbed of sleep on the path of the fool. That there's a physiological response to foolish behavior. It's not just spiritual. It's not just, a guilt thing. It becomes physiological. You ever notice when you catch somebody in a lie, they start sweating? There's a physiological response to the path of the fool. I've noticed in my life, when I find myself bending towards concealment instead of confession, trying to hide, trying to keep, I don't want them to know this, and I don't want, when I find myself concealing instead of being free and just being open with struggles, whatever it is, I start losing sleep. You start laying awake at night thinking of all the stories and all the different narratives you have going on with different people. That path, it's destructive, not just spiritually, but to your very health and your very well-being. When I live a life of greed, of just thinking about myself instead of generosity, it starts to constrict. It starts to limit my ability to function. I start losing sleep on that path. And Solomon's saying, of course, because it's all connected. It's not just a spiritual thing. It's physiological. You start losing sleep on the path of the fool. That doesn't mean if you have sleep problems today, that means you're a fool. I just want you to know. You're like, well, man, this guy's a real jerk. It says this, verse 17. I love these words that he uses, so powerful. They, talking about the foolish choices, the fools, they eat the bread of wickedness and they drink the wine of violence. Isn't that great? You can't get that at Ralph's today, by the way. Excuse me, where is your wine of violence section? Is that somewhere in the back? It's underneath the yellowtail. The path. I don't know. Verse 18, the path of the righteous is like the morning sun. And he's using all these images because the Hebrew mind thinks in terms of pictures, images. We don't think this way. Oftentimes the scriptures are bizarre to us because you were brought up in a world that says cold hard facts, data, bullet points, lists. That's how we want to understand information. The Bible works in a different language. It's pictures, images. The wine of violence, the morning sun. These are provocative, powerful images that describe what the path of the wise is like. Shining ever brighter to the full light of day. But the way of the wicked, he says, is like a deep darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. When you're on the path of the fool, it's continually confusing to you why the choices you're making aren't leading you to satisfaction and joy. You just can't understand. What does Einstein say? The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. This is why Solomon at one point from that same page says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to their folly. It's gross, but it sort of works. You sort of get that image. That you will do the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, and a fool is never aware of, why is this not working? I did it yesterday. It just sort of continues. It just stays. We can't see. We lack self-awareness on that path. You keep going. These powerful images that he's using. Verse 20, I love this. My son, pay attention to what I say. I say this to my boys every single day. My son, pay attention to what I say. See, some of you have never read the Bible, but you quote scripture frequently. My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Just give this speech to one of your kids. I would love this. This would be great. Turn your ear to my words, son. This is great. He talks about the ear, then he says something about the eye. Do not let them out of your sight. The words of God, they should be so precious to you. Do not let them out of your sight. So he talks about the ear, he's talking about the eye. He's keep them within your heart. Now in the Hebrew mind, the heart is the seat of the soul. It's not just something that is medical and pumping blood through your body. It's the seat of the soul. And the eyes, the ears, are the window, the access points to the seat of the soul. So he's saying we need to be careful what gets through the ears and the eyes, because if it makes its way here, you're the gatekeeper of the soul. You have to be taking care of this thing called the heart. What gets past your eyes and through your ears is of utmost importance to the proverb writer. A wise person is evaluating the heart, but the ears and the eyes as well. For they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. If you've met anyone, I have a couple friends recently who got out of rehab, and when you see them, they just look better. There's something about beginning to stand on the path of the wise, making good choices. It's not just spiritual. It's not just, well, I'm not as guilty as I used to. Physically, to the whole body, is Solomon's point. You can just sort of tell that there's some kind of a new way, some new air that's being breathed. Of course, for this is it's the whole body. It's not just your spiritual self. And then he says this. He says, this is the most important thing. So apparently for Solomon, of all the Proverbs, he sort of landed on this in verse 23 of chapter 4. Above all else. And so what he's going to say next is very, very important. He doesn't say above all else, memorize some scripture. He doesn't say above all else, read the Bible. He says above all else, this is his words, guard your what? Your heart. Above all else, guard your seat of the soul, for everything you do flows from it. Be a gatekeeper of your heart, for everything you do flows from it, according to Solomon. Be a gatekeeper of the seat of the soul, for your entire life. Some translations say it's the wellspring of life. The heart is the wellspring of life. Solomon is making this connection for us between our heart and our feet. And we don't usually make this connection. Between whatever our heart has gotten wrapped around in life, whatever we find to be beautiful, whatever we've gotten enamored with, there's this powerful connection between our heart and our feet and our path, what we end up doing, how we spend money, the words we say, how we treat people, how we treat ourselves. It's all connected to something in the heart. And so his fundamental question is what have you fallen in love with? What have you given your heart to? He's asking us in a world that often takes us towards the exterior, even in church, make some changes to your debt ratio, give a little more money, be a little more conscious of what you watch, don't listen to this, don't do this, a little less, this show, a little more Bible. We often are focused on exterior changes. Solomon says, no, you got to go interior. What have you fallen in love with? What has become the thing that has enamored you, that you see as the most beautiful thing in the world? Guard that. Because whatever it is, your life is going to go towards it again and again. Your life is going to flow from whatever it is you've fallen in love with. If you want to change your behavior or something, you got to go to the interior. What have you fallen in love with? Change what you love, and you'll start to change the way that you live, according to Solomon. Quite often, if you're anything like me, we get fascinated with the question of how do I change? For many of us, this is why you're in church today. You want to know, or maybe it's why you're back in church for the first time in a long time. You want to know, how can I begin to change as a person? How do I begin to change my attitude? How do I change my outlook on life? How do I change, my faith? How do I change my wife? How do I change my husband? How do I bring some level of change to my life? And quite often, if you're anything like me, the Christian experience is a lot like gardening, and it just feels like we're pulling weeds all the time. And we have a behavior, we have a pattern, we have something that we don't like, and we just pull it up, and we pull it up, and we're kind of going through life, and we just keep pulling it up. And that's what the spiritual experience often feels like. And Solomon's point is, eventually you have to put down the weed eater, and you have to pick up a shovel. And you have to get to the source of whatever is causing the thing to grow back. You have to get to the source of whatever the problem is, or else you're just going to keep mowing the weeds down and pulling the weeds over and over again. What is it that you love? Whatever the heart has gone to, whatever the heart has fallen in love with, that's the thing long term that has determined your course, your actions, for better or for worse. What have you fallen in love with? And especially as guys, this is a question we don't like to wrestle with. What has your heart been given over to? I would say it's just guys. I would say in the Western world, we don't think of our heart in such lofty terms. We don't give it that much credit. You were brought up in a world, I've been brought up in a world that has a dualistic view of human nature. There's the head and there's the heart. There's the mind, and then there's the emotion. That's kind of how we think of human nature. And in that sort of paradigm, the head is the even keel place. It's the rational part of you. It's the reasonable part of you. It's the calm, collected part of you. And then there's the heart, which is sort of this wild, unpredictable, whimsical. We even have sayings for this. The heart wants what it wants. We tend to talk about the head as if the head's that part of you that, wears a fancy jacket, smokes a pipe, reads Shakespeare, that's the part you should listen to. And then there's your heart, which, it's got like Miley Cyrus tunes cranked up, woo, it's just sort of this, we don't know what it's gonna do. And so you gotta hang with the Miley Cyrus reference this morning. But we tend to think of change. If you say, well, how does a person change? If you ask any psychologist, well, how do you change? Well, you've got to begin to bring the heart in submission to the head. You have to start making the head speak to the heart a little more. That's how you're going to change. You got to start making sure the head's not driving the car of your life, because if it is, it's going to take it right off a cliff, man. That's just how it works. And so we tend to view the head as far more important than the heart. This is just sort of a emotional, unpredictable place. The Bible takes a much different view of human nature and of your heart. The Bible holds the heart in much higher esteem than we often do. And the Bible's perspective is not that the heart is the wellspring of emotion or just sort of this emotional place. Who knows what it's going to do? The Bible's view, it's the wellspring of life. Everything you do flows from what you have fallen in love with and from your heart. And if you want to change your life, it's not trying to get your head to control your heart. It's evaluating, and what wise people begin to do is evaluate, what is it that I have actually fallen in love with? Because that's determining and dictating the course and the direction of my life. What's the most beautiful thing to you? What is your heart been given over to? You could think of it this way. Every single one of us in this room, you have like a throne to your heart. And there's something that finds its way to that throne. There's something that ultimately will land there. There's something that ultimately is going to sit there. And this is true for every single one of us in this room. You are made, I am made to merge with something. And your heart, you can't help it. It's how you've been wired up. It's how you are created this way as an emotional, spiritual creature. You're going to merge with something in life. And the thing that you will merge with, you maybe don't even know what it is at this moment. But if you start looking at your time, how you spend money, how what you've made sacrifices for, it's something in your life. It might have happened at an early age. It's whatever you have found to be the most beautiful option in the world, the most beautiful thing in the world, the most beautiful person in the world. Whatever it is, you will give your heart towards it. You will worship it. Even if you're not a Christian, we all end up worshiping something. Worship is not a Christian thing. It's a human being thing. And we all end up worshiping whatever our heart has merged with and decided is the most beautiful thing in life. And this is why Solomon is saying, guard your heart, because in the short term, you can make some changes, you can get rid of some weeds, you can modify some behaviors, but long term, what will determine what you do, where you go, the kind of person you are, is whatever your heart has been given over to and whatever you've merged it with. And wise people evaluate, what is my heart merged with? What has my heart been given over to? Guard your heart. It's the wellspring of life. Everything you do flows from it. And your life will bend in the direction of whatever sits on its throne. Your life will curve towards and around whatever is on the throne of your heart. And Solomon's point ultimately is just this: if it's anything other than God that finds its way here, you are destined for the path of the fool, and so am I. If it's anything other than God that you see and find to be the most beautiful thing and the most beautiful source of life, we become destined for the path of the fool. We don't think of it that way, but it's the reason he says guard your heart, because whatever it's going to go to, even if it's a good thing, and this is true for most of us, the thing that will allow our heart to merge with, it's something that's good. It's probably not going to be, a pile of drugs in Tijuana or wherever. It's probably going to be something that's really, really good, but it became not just good, it became ultimate. And when that happened, by default, we start walking down the path of the fool, and it starts undercutting our ability to experience satisfaction and joy. It's when a good thing becomes an ultimate thing. Probably the best example in American culture for most of us is money. Money's a good thing, but it can't become an ultimate thing. And it's a great thing to have, but if your heart merges with it, if it ceases to be a good thing, money's a great thing, but it's a terrible God. Have you ever noticed that? And if your heart merges with it, if it becomes the most beautiful thing in the pursuit of life, you become destined for the path of the fool. It starts at an early age. Maybe it's in college where if your heart has merged with money, as most people, that's the thing that grabs them. If your heart merges with money, you'll start right out of college. You'll start choosing jobs that aren't based on fulfillment or what am I wired to do. You'll start choosing jobs that are just based on paycheck. And a couple years into that career, you'll start burning out. You'll start getting, anxious. I got to change. I got to do something different. And you won't then choose a career based on fulfillment. You'll just start choosing careers that are based upon more money and more money, because that becomes the most beautiful thing. That becomes the thing that your life curves towards, bend towards over and over again. And what happens? The more you get of it, the more you want. It never seems to satisfy. In fact, it undercuts your ability to ever experience satisfaction and joy. And your life is bent in that direction. You'll start compromising relationships for it. You'll give up a marriage for it. You'll compromise your health for it, because it's not just a good thing, it has become the ultimate thing. And whatever your heart merges with and whatever my heart merges with, we hand our life to it. We worship it. We give it our health. It becomes the priority of our souls. And Solomon's point is if it's anything other than God, even if it's a good thing, if it becomes an ultimate thing, it will destroy you. You'll be destined for the path of the fool. And wise people are constantly stepping back and analyzing and asking questions about what their heart has been given over to. Because long term, that's what determines your path, and that's what determines my path. It could be a good thing. It could be marriage. Oftentimes marriage it's a good thing. Marriage is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a gift. But oftentimes marriage, finding a spouse, can become not just a good pursuit, it becomes the ultimate pursuit. I talk to single people in our church all the time. If I could just find, Mr. Right, if I could just find, Mrs. Right, I would be complete. I would be so happy. To which I always say, have you talked to a married person lately? It's a beautiful thing, but it is not the thing that ultimately will satisfy you. And if you make that the pursuit, even if you're married, if your marriage isn't just a part of your life, isn't just a good part of your life, if it becomes the ultimate part of your life, if your heart merges with your spouse, what begins to happen is one of two things. One, if you're single, you will never find a person to marry because you will be far too picky, because you're not looking for a spouse, you're looking for a God. And nobody can live up to that standard. Or you will get married, you'll marry the first person that comes along, and you will end up trying to force them into some image that you've created, and you will make them miserable and yourself miserable in the process, and you will undercut your ability to have the one thing that you ultimately want. If a good thing becomes an ultimate thing, we're destined for the path of the fool. We cannot experience joy and satisfaction until we come to the place of saying, what does my heart merge with? Is it the most beautiful thing in all of creation, the God of heaven and earth, the creator of wisdom itself? As a dad, a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, 2-year-old, often the temptation as parents, especially young kids, is that our kids, which are good mostly, would become ultimate. That they become the thing that our heart merges with, and we seldom ask questions about it. Well, of course, it's your kids, and kids are great, don't get me wrong, but if they become the ultimate pursuit, if they become the ultimate, what will end up happening is one of two things. One, you'll never punish, if your kids become the ultimate, if your heart merges with your kids, you will never punish them for fear of being rejected by them. You'll be too afraid of disappointing them. Or, you will end up, again, trying to force them into some image, and you will destroy the relationship, trying to force them into some image of who you expect them to be, and you will undercut your ability to have a relationship with them at all. If your heart merges, this is why Solomon says this is so critical, this is so important. If your heart merges with something other than God, by default, you become destined for the path of the fool. And Christianity is different than all other religions of the world because Christianity doesn't say that desire is bad. All other religions essentially say that your desires are corrupt, they're wicked. But Christianity says desire is not the problem. The question for Christianity is, what is the object of your desire? And oftentimes the problem is we've become too satisfied with too little, and if we keep going, we've settled for like a counterfeit lowercase g God, and we've missed out on the bigger, grander, capital G God who wants to sit on the throne of our heart and actually begin to give us the satisfaction, joy, wisdom that we desire in our life. Maybe another way to say it, if I walked into the tree house on the other side of this wall where kids 4 and under currently are. If I walked into that room, and I'm not going to do this, but if I did, and I just started walking around, say I walked in there today, and I took a plate of Atlantic King salmon in there right now. Say I just walked in there. And some of you have kids in that room. And say I just walked around, and I was like, hey, everybody, how you doing? I have some Atlantic King salmon here. Who wants in? Now, some of you guys and women you fish a lot, so you know this is not Atlantic King salmon. This is Ralph's King salmon. But say I offered this. Say, hey, who wants in on this? Am I going to have any takers on the salmon, on the 4 and unders? No. They're not even going to know what it is. They're going to be looking at me like, no, my parents taught me, don't take fish from a stranger. We're not crazy. Like, no. Like, we don't know you, dude. Get out of here. No way. They wouldn't even understand. Now, if I fired up a grill up here and put on some salmon, we'd have a line out the door, man. We'd have, some serious seating problems in this room. But if I offered that to the nursery, no way. Now, if I walked into the nursery and I had the nectar of the gods, what do you think would happen? It would be a worship service over there. They would sing, he loves us so. He'd be elated. I got a kid over there, Ezra, my 2-year-old's over there, and I'm telling you, somewhere along the way, I don't even know when it happened, his heart merged with goldfish. He just walks around. It doesn't matter what kind of goldfish they are. He's just constantly you stay away. These are my goldfish. And they would miss out on the better thing because they would want a lesser thing, an artificial version of something that's so much better. And Solomon's point is the same thing happens with us. We end up going through life just clutching artificial versions of God, holding on to them, clutching them, going, oh, this is going to give me so much satisfaction and joy. This is so good. And our stomachs get full, our eyes get filled with wonder over little g gods, things that were never designed and intended to give us nourishment and actual satisfaction and joy. And in the process, we end up missing out on the much better thing because we've clutched the lesser thing, and our hearts merge with the lesser thing, And Solomon's point in Proverbs is not just do this, don't do this, be a person who goes here and not there, not just pick up a weed eater. He's saying take a shovel out, and so you can begin to taste and see that the Lord is good. So you can begin to actually bite down, give your life to something that's actually going to give you nourishment and satisfaction and joy. And how many of us go through life just clutching the lesser thing and ignoring the better thing. And there's only one thing in life that if we allow our heart to merge with it, will actually begin to give us the satisfaction and the joy that we long for. And it's not something that's just a good thing. It's the best option there is. And that's what Solomon has realized in his old age. The God of heaven and earth, the creator of heaven and earth, wants to sit on the throne of your heart. He wants to be the ultimate thing that your heart has merged with. It's why a Tozer's question is so pivotal. What do you think about when you think about God? Because if he is not the most beautiful and satisfying option, if he isn't the thing that you look at and you say, that's the one, he's the one, we will end up going through life giving our heart over to goldfish over and over again. And we will miss out on the better thing because we've chosen the lesser thing. The problem is not your desires, it's that they become too easily satisfied. And we settle for a life that's far less than what God intended for us. I love the way that C.S. Lewis, another brilliant writer, says it in his book, The Weight of Glory. And he just says this: when we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We get too easily satisfied with the wrong things. We don't keep going. Christianity invites us to pursue our desires all the way to God himself. To keep going, to not stop because we got satisfied with some goldfish along the way, but to go all the way where we actually begin to taste and see that the Lord is good, that he is the source, he is the place that can actually satisfy our desires. Allow your heart to merge with him, and by default, you will find yourself on the path of the wise because his words will become like honey to you. His teachings, his sayings, the New Testament, the Old Testament will become like a light in the darkness to you. But that only happens. We only want him to have that place. We only want his words to have that kind of authority when our heart is merged with God. We've seen him as the best and the most beautiful option that there is in life. I've gotten in this habit at night, placing my hand over my heart and asking the question, is my heart okay? And I don't mean that in a medical sense. I mean that in a spiritual sense. What does my heart merge with today? What did I allow my heart to be given over to? Maybe in conversation, maybe when I was watching an advertisement. What have I allowed my heart to gravitate towards today? Is my soul okay? Because if the condition of our soul is not in a good place, if it's being given over to the wrong thing, it becomes impossible to have the kind of life that we want and the kind of life that God wants for us. Let me ask you that question. Is your heart okay? Is your soul okay today? What have you given it over to? We're going to sing a song in just a few moments, but before we do, let's just take a moment, reflect on that question, pray together. God, I thank you that you have not given a rule book. You've not just handed us a list of instructions. You've handed us yourself. You didn't just give us words on a page. You gave us a person, the person of Jesus Christ. And your goal isn't just we would know what to do and what not to do. Your goal is that our heart would merge with the Son of God. Our heart would merge with you as the Creator. Our heart would begin to see you as the ultimate, the best source of life, the most beautiful thing there is in life. And I pray that over all of us today, God. We can get some sayings right. We can get some behaviors right. But if we miss this, we've missed everything. What does our heart merge with? What have we fallen in love with today? I just pray, God, would it be true of us that our soul has been given over to the right things? It's in Jesus' name that we pray, and all of God's children said.